Now, here's what we understand about science. Science changes its mind every 5 years. Takes back everything it said, never says it was wrong, says we've had a paradigm shift. Now, and I also have to remind people that just because it's in a book doesn't mean it's, because the criminally insane can also write. So now let's go to those areas that we so often turn to for our proof. Let's go to science. And these are things that are very important because this actually comes out of a book. Okay. How many of you are familiar with Carl von Linnaeus? Carl von Linnaeus. I want you to remember this date, 1707 to 1778. This is when he lived. Carl von Linnaeus developed a taxonomic system based on a criterion of skin color and laid the basis for 19th century racial classification. Linnaeus properly began the science of anthropology. So Linnaeus is to anthropology what Freud is to psychology, the father of psychology. Now, a lot of people don't like Freud, particularly women. And those who don't have the issue with the things he said about women, know that he was on cocaine most of the time. But you cannot deal with psychology unless you go through Freud. So the same is true of Linnaeus. Folks don't like Linnaeus too much, but you can't avoid him. Although color classification of races dated back to the ancient Egyptians, anthropologists referred to Linnaeus' taxonomy of 1735 as the first modern study of man. While Linnaeus advanced classification with his use of a color criterion, he also fixed on his 4 families of man certain moral and intellectual peculiarities that continued into the 19th century anthropological vocabulary. He described Homo Americanus. Who might that be? That would be the Native American or the Indian. Homo Americanus, he said they were reddish, choleric, obstinate, contented, and regulated by customs. Homo Europaeus, as white, fickle, sanguine, blue-eyed, gentle, and governed by laws. Homo Asiaticus, as sallow, grave, dignified, avaricious, and ruled by opinions. And Homo Afer, as black, phlegmatic, cunning, lazy, lustful, careless, and governed by caprice. These insights into what Linnaeus defined as racial character, personality, behavior, intelligence, language, and a host of other related categories were transmitted into subsequent attempts at a science of classification and became more fixed than the races themselves. Not a shred of science here. But it's in a book. But more importantly, of all the groups mentioned, there was only one that had the most scathing assessment, and that was Homo Afer. And now I'm going to tell you why that's so, because we know there's no science here. The reason why is because of that notion of cognitive dissonance. Now let me explain how that works. If I have a certain amount of information, knowledge, values, and beliefs that I hold true, and I am now faced with something in either my behavior or in my world that conflicts with that, it creates dissonance. Human beings work to remove dissonance. You cannot function with it. For example, if there is a child that I'm dealing with, and I've dealt with all of what they call the bad children, I want you to imagine a bad child. For 15 years, Johnny's been told he's bad. What does he believe that he is? He believes he's bad. And then the social worker types like myself show up and say to Johnny, "No, Johnny," because we've taken parent effectiveness training, "you're not bad. You're good." What does Johnny then do? He does something very bad. He breaks my windshield, cracks it, slashes my tires, and says, "There, I told you I'm bad." Now, see, I'm from South Central. I'm going to go with him on that. But if I'm a good social worker, I'm going to continue to say to Johnny that you are good until he maybe carves out a piece of himself that begins to believe good. But what happens when I tell Johnny he's good is it creates cognitive dissonance. And Johnny does something to remove the dissonance, to confirm for himself who he is. So understand, under any circumstances, human beings will work to remove the discomfort first. Now, I want to go back to that date, 1707 to 1778. What was going on in America? American chattel slavery. So now I have to ask you this question. Do you think slave owners, slave masters, men or women, do you think they went to church? You think they sang hymns? You think they probably assisted in raising the funds for the choir robes and such? You think? Of course they did. Of course they did. And that might have been on Sunday. But on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday, they were raping 9, 10, 11, 12-year-old slave girls. So by the time they got to the pews, they had to be sitting there with immunity. You see, they had to feel, certainly it's not my fault, because after all, did it not say scientifically that they're lustful? Then they deserved what they got, didn't they? It's not my fault, so I can sit there absolved in the pews, because human beings cannot function with dissonance. So what we understand about individuals like Linnaeus is he paved the way to ease the conscience of the white Christian world. And so when we begin to look at this, we need to understand it with another lens. So he also had a contemporary person that another person that he dealt with. His name was Johann Friedrich Blumenbach. Now, how many of you are familiar with the term or believe yourself to be Caucasian? It's okay. Johann Friedrich Blumenbach, he lived 1752 to 1840, designated 5 races or varieties of man in the second edition of his treaty on the natural variety of mankind. His division into Caucasian, Mongolian, American, Ethiopian, and Malayan races with the added Linnaean descriptive peculiarities became the subsequent basis of most 19th century anthropomedical studies. While Linnaeus founded his system based on skin color, Blumenbach considered a combination of color, hair, skull, and facial characteristics as fundamental means for classifying the 5 varieties of man. Central to his study was the Caucasian, a term which he originated. Now listen for the science. He took the name Caucasian from Mount Caucasus because its southern slope had cradled what he felt to be the most beautiful race of men, the Georgian. The Caucasus near Mount Ararat, upon which the biblical ark came to rest after the flood, seemed the appropriate source for the original race of man. Now I'm going to quote him. These are his words. For in the first place, the stock displays, as we have seen, the most beautiful form of the skull, from which is a mean and primeval type the others diverge, by most easy gradations on both sides to the 2 ultimate extremes. That is, on the one side, the Mongolian. You got folks walking around talking about being Caucasian, Mongolian, all that sort of thing. Now, I want to tell you something. I want to share something. I've never done this before, but I'm going to do it in this audience because I thought about it from the context of really experiencing a thing. And then I'm going to talk to you about the definitive, something a little bit more definitive. With the people in the audience that believe, now before you stand up, I want to tell you, make you clear about it, that believe that you are African American. I'm saying that. Now that means that you don't suffer any difficulty or ambiguity when you sign the little things, ask what your race is. Okay, and that means and I'm not mad at you, let's be clear. If there are people here that have a parent that's of another race, and they get up there and they're resentful because they say, I'm not this, I'm this and this. I want only the people to stand there to have no ambiguity about being African American. I want you to stand up. If you consider yourself to be African American, okay. Now, I want you to look around the room and you're going to find that people are of all hues. You got people with different facial features, different hair textures. Some of us got big butts, and some of us wish we had a big butt, flat butts, all of that, different body type. We got all that going on. Now, those of you that are standing there, believe yourselves to be African American. If you know of somewhere in your family that there's some white blood, I'm not talking philosophically, you can find them. I want you to sit, please be seated. Those that know of certainty, a pretty significant amount of you. Okay, now, those African Americans that are still standing, Now, I always go to this group toward the end because everybody thinks they're Indian. Okay. The strangest thing about it is everybody got some Indian in them. I ain't mad at you, okay? I'm not mad. And the only people I know that can actually become, white people can become Indian. So they braid the hair, buy the turquoise, and they in. Because they've decided they're Indian. I've talked to Indian people about that, but that's another training. Okay, so those of you in this, really that know that you have some Indian blood of the African American standing, you got some Indian blood, go on and be seated. Now, of those African Americans that are standing, if you know for a fact you have some Hispanic or Latino blood in you, if you have some Asian or Pacific Islander blood in you, would you please be seated? Okay, can we now give an applause for the 2 or 3 or 4 of y'all that are African American? Now, we also had Africans in the room that just, came from the continent, I'm talking about the African American. Now, my point here, I got freckles. Something been going on here, okay? Let's be clear. So by virtue almost of being African American, and basically infers that you have mixture. Okay, it's mixed, all mixed up in there. And now let's get back to the one-drop rule. Now, the problem is, here's the good news and bad news. All of you that are African American, those of you that got truly African American, those of you that realize you had other mixture, those of you that are biracial, what have you, in a racist society, you're all niggas. Thank you. Now, here comes the truth about race. And see, I do this as a preliminary because I've not begun the discussion, you see. Not really, because we have to get clear on a few things. We got to get clear. We aren't even clear about racism. So we got to get clear about stuff. And what we do understand, some of y'all thought, hair, skull, facial characteristics. Y'all went for that, some of you. I know you did. You're not going to admit it now, but I know you did. You thought, yeah, that makes sense. Now, I want to ask you, where do you find people geographically in the world, that have straight blonde hair? Where geographically? Specifically, Scandinavia. So in Scandinavia is where you find the folks with the straight blonde hair. We all know that. How do you explain Aboriginal children being born with straight blonde hair? How do you explain the subcutaneous fold in the eyes of the Bushmen of the Kalahari? How do you explain the broad lips of the Eskimo? You see, these things do not distinguish race. They do not. So let's read what DNA has told us now that we can look at it. Race is a concept of society that insists there is a genetic significance behind human variations in skin color that transcends outward appearance. However, race has no scientific merit outside of sociological classification. There are no significant genetic variations within the human species to justify the division of races. Mankind is one. That's the truth. That's what Martin knew. Martin knew intrinsically that mankind was one. And what we're going to talk about today is if, in fact, it is undeniable that we are one, that we are more alike than we are different. Matter of fact, there is more difference within a culture than outside of it. So, in fact, mankind is one. If we follow the one-drop rule in reverse, Martin Luther King would be Irish. And yet you laugh. But we bought the other one, didn't we? We bought it. Why did we buy it? We chuckle when we say if we use a one-drop rule that Martin would be Irish, but everybody gets to claim if they got a drop of black, do they not? So we got to get into the psychology of why that's so, which I think is greatly impacted by post-traumatic slave syndrome in terms of how we look at and identify ourselves, quote, racially, because it is a myth. It's not true. So now we've got to look at why then Why then have we suffered so much around the proof, the bell curve, Shockley, Jensen, phrenology, all of the things to prove a genetic inferiority? Aristotelian concepts of the natural slave, that you are de facto a slave by virtue of your skin color. You were born and intrinsically and inherently a slave, never to be on par with whites. What would prompt such a thing? This is what we have to understand in order to understand why we behave the way we do and what the nature of the injury is. So when I began to look, and I looked closely, I looked at the literature, and I looked at all the kinds of things that produce these notions socially in society. It's not a hard answer. It's not a hard answer because I believe everything in the dark is coming to the light. Everything is coming to the light. Sally Hemings, we all knew, didn't we? Come on, how long we knew? We always knew about Sally Hemings. And then folks got all twisted and upset when they said, oh, Lord Jefferson fathered, oh, Lord, slave black, oh, no. One of the four found, oh, what we gonna do? And then we had Strom Thurmond. It took 100 years to unravel that lie, but it was there. And I just want to know on record, anybody here know a white Washington? Do the math. Do the math. So this has never been a mystery to us. But there is fear. And the only way that love can triumph is in the absence of fear. Because you see, love cannot dwell in a heart possessed by fear. You got to cast that out because that's where faith lies. And so when we start looking at the fear that people have of the truth, because that's what we're talking about, the fear. And the interesting thing about it is Martin talked a lot about truth, light, truth, knowledge, love. He talked about that. And what we have to understand is when he said that there was power in light, he meant that literally. Because if we were to turn all the lights out in this sanctuary, if it was dark in this sanctuary, we turned off all the lights, and there was one candle standing in the doorway, that light would flow in, the darkness would not flow out. Because darkness is an absence of light. You see, and when we start looking at the absence of truth is where we get the fear and we get the ignorance. And so the way we deal with that is you replace it with the truth. And you replace it with courage. And that's what we have to do as we journey through our own healing.
This is divine judgment. America is under judgment, not by man, but by God himself. The same God who judged Egypt, who judged Babylon, who judged Rome, is now weighing America in the balance and finding her wanting. America has sown destruction, and now it reaps decline. It has sown arrogance, and now it reaps humiliation. It has sown lies, and now it reaps truth, truth that cannot be hidden anymore. America is a land built on blood, on the sweat and suffering of the people it has enslaved, displaced, and silenced. But tell that truth today, and they call it divisive. They call it unpatriotic. They want you to believe that history is just a collection of dates and figures, stripped of the brutality, the deception, the theft. They tell you the Trail of Tears was just relocation, that the Colfax Massacre, Wilmington Coup and Massacre, Rosewood Massacre, Atlanta Race Massacre, Ocoee Massacre, Tulsa Massacre, Harlem Race Massacres of 1943 and 1964 was just riots, and that Jim Crow was merely a setback. What they refuse to admit is that America was never a nation of freedom. It was a nation of conquest, built on white supremacy, and it has never stopped being one. And that is why they are so desperate to erase the past. You see, history, real history, has power. It reveals the truth of this nation, of what was done and what is still being done. They call it critical race theory today, but it's just the truth, and that's why they fight so hard to bury it. From school boards banning books, to politicians scrubbing slavery from textbooks, to social media platforms silencing voices that dare speak honestly about America's past. White supremacy is culturally ingrained into every aspect of white society, in the home, school, religion, and politics. But tell me, what does it say about a people who fear history? It says they know their hands are bloody, and they are terrified that their children will ask them why. Because the truth would destroy their illusion of innocence. The same way it did when the world saw Black Wall Street burn. The same way it did when Jim Crow's chains were exposed for what they were. The same way it did when the Southern strategy was revealed as a blueprint for racial control, not democracy. But America has always had a strategy. Slave patrols became the police. Redlining became modern real estate steering. The plantation became the prison. And now, they want to act like none of it happened. They want to rewrite history to keep future generations obedient, ignorant, docile. And yet, what they don't understand is that you cannot erase pain. You cannot erase memory. You cannot erase the reality of people who have suffered and endured. This nation made laws to steal land from Native people. The Homestead Act gave free land to whites while barring Black freedmen Americans from ownership. The Immigration Act of 1924 made sure America remained a white country, closing its doors to those it deemed unfit. And when we, Black freedmen Americans, dared to build wealth, dared to thrive, they sent mobs, they sent bombs, they sent laws disguised as justice to tear down Black freedmen Americans' communities. And it wasn't enough for them to unalive us. They had to erase us. They built highways through our neighborhoods, turning communities into ghettos. They passed California Proposition 14 to uphold segregation. They used COINTELPRO to assassinate Black leaders. They used the daughters of Confederates to put Confederate statues in our faces, not in 1865, but during the Civil Rights Movement, as a warning, as a message. And still, they want us to believe in their version of America, an America where slavery was a misunderstanding, where the Tuskegee experiment was a footnote, where mass incarceration is just an accident. No, sir. No, ma'am. White supremacy is in the bones of this country, in the schools, the churches, the homes, the politics. It is a disease, and they refuse to cure it. But there is something they should fear more than the truth being known. They should fear what happens when the next generation realizes they have been lied to. What happens when young people of all colors understand that history was stolen from them, that their textbooks were propaganda, that their teachers were ordered to deceive. A people who know they have been deceived do not trust, and a people who do not trust begin to question everything. That is what America fears most, not the past, but the reckoning it demands. And that reckoning is coming. No matter how many books they ban, no matter how many voices they silence, no matter how many lies they tell, truth is like a flame. It spreads. And once it touches the people, it cannot be extinguished. The question is not whether America will reckon with its past. The question is whether America will survive what it has done. Tell me what you think about this topic. Hope you find the information in this video informative. Feel free to like, subscribe, share, comment. Thanks for watching.